This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about the Bitcoin Coremunist Manifesto. Today we present yet another sad chapter in the ongoing saga in which Bitcoin Core continues to capitulate to crypto VCs and malicious mining pools, and also continues trying to overturn the long-held tradition of protecting Bitcoin from spam attacks. As we discussed in this video, which I'll link to in the description notes below, Bitcoin culture has always been anti-spam and has emphasized the monetary uses of Bitcoin. So what today's video is about is this blog post that Bitcoin Core put out as sort of a monolithic entity. It's called Bitcoin Core Development and Transaction Relay Policy, and it's talking about what nodes and node software should be doing when it comes to spam. As Giacomo points out here, how can the website describing a decentralized and open source development project with many contributors over many years, often disagreeing on many topics, issue an official statement about such a topic? Who is the we? Just the signers of the statement? Should I then assume the minority of disagreeing contributors could sign a different statement and the website would just publish it? Or should I consider this site the voice of a formal organization with a clear governance and distinguish the amorphous mass of Bitcoin Core external contributors who can have different opinions on the topic from a well-defined Bitcoin Core governance body with an official voice? As they talk about at the beginning here, they write, Bitcoin Core writes, as Bitcoin Core developers, we also consider it our responsibility to make our software work as efficiently and reliably as possible for its purpose. We'll be talking about that in a moment. Its purpose, namely validating and relaying blocks and transactions in the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network so that Bitcoin succeeds as a decentralized digital currency. So when it's talking here about Bitcoin's purpose, or the software's purpose, Bitcoin Core devs, I think, are assuming the conclusion. Purpose of Bitcoin since the very beginning has always been to be a monetary network that relays monetary transaction and blocks full of monetary transactions. Relaying JPEGs does nothing to help Bitcoin succeed as a decentralized digital currency, whatever Bitcoin Core may say to the contrary. In fact, JPEGs and other Bitcoin spam actually undermine Bitcoin's use as money by competing for block space with monetary uses of Bitcoin and by forcing node runners to store non-monetary data that does not benefit them, but rather that benefits malicious mining pools like Mara and crypto VCs instead. It's important to never forget who is profiting and who profits from Bitcoin spam. It's the crypto VCs and malicious mining pools. It's not node runners like you and me. So this is a very strange statement to see from a group that actually makes the software for Bitcoin node runners. I'll put a link to this as well, who's gained rich from Bitcoin spam. There's a picture of David Bailey, who runs the Bitcoin conference. As Samson Mal writes here, Bitcoin Core devs have been changing the network gradually to enable spam. They've been changing it certainly since the Taproot upgrade and the failure to patch that bug. Bitcoin Core devs have been changing the network gradually to enable spam and now seem focused on also removing barriers for spammers. It's disingenuous to say it is what it is now, too bad, as if pretending spam was this force of nature that can't be stopped. And also Samson writes, this statement, meaning this Bitcoin Core blog post itself, is inappropriate. Feels like a New York agreement NYA from core devs. So he's alluding back to the block size wars when large corporations got together and tried to force Bitcoin nodes to run their software, and Bitcoin nodes refused. Bitcoin Core, as I said at the beginning of this video, has become a near monolithic entity, putting out editorials in an attempt to manage public relations while they're in the midst of forcing through changes to their software that the vast majority of Bitcoiners don't want. Whatever happened to Bitcoin Core being this loosely affiliated group of anarchic, prickly individuals, I would say that a united Bitcoin Core that is more concerned about the needs of crypto startups and miners than the needs and desires of node runners, this kind of monolithic core is a huge and direct threat to Bitcoin. And they'll say, as they say in this blog post, if you don't like what Bitcoin Core is doing, you're free to run your own software. And while that's true, and I am running Bitcoin Knots instead of Bitcoin Core, it's important to recognize that defaults do matter. And what's in the default software implementation of Bitcoin, which is still Bitcoin Core because it has the most users, it matters. These defaults matter. What's in the default software matters. And the default settings inside of this default implementation also really matter because most people run software out of the box and don't play around with the settings. So if Bitcoin Core blows open the opportune filters as they want to do, it will have a real effect on the network unless we can get enough people to run Bitcoin Knots before Core makes the change. Finding this video helpful today, I just ask you to help to support this channel's educational mission. Hit the subscribe button, that does really help. Leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video, and share this video with a friend or family member. As James O.B. writes here, and I believe he's a Bitcoin Core dev as well, I happen to agree with the core guys on the filter stuff, but Greg Maxwell's sentiment here is simplistic, bordering on disingenuous. This is where Greg Maxwell on Reddit is writing, Core has no ability to remove your option to self-determine, to think otherwise is surf thinking, basically saying if you don't like what Core is doing, you can run your own software. So that's what James is responding to here. He's saying Greg Maxwell says, well, you can just go do things. Well, not really, James writes, because Core has a tremendous amount of latent power for at least two reasons. Number one, every business has basically hard-coded the use of that implementation, Bitcoin Core, with levels of risk aversion surpassing, quote, never got fired for buying IBM, end quote, creating an amazing de facto monopoly on economic nodes. And number two, Bitcoin is so complicated that any non-developer inherently must delegate to some technical authority they trust, and Core winds up being the target of that delegation. This is a tremendous amount of sticky power. So it's not easy for people to switch. It's not easy for large companies to switch. He writes, yes, in theory, a large part of the ecosystem could decide to run an alternate implementation, but the switching, coordination, incidental risk costs there are huge, etc., etc. And then he concludes, this single choke point is going to be a big problem for Bitcoin, even if the filters issue isn't per se an epitome of it. And then Hodling Like I Mean It writes, for most of Bitcoin's existence, this is a good reminder here of how Bitcoin Core treated this and how they treated nodes. For most of Bitcoin's existence, anytime external projects, meaning startups, for example, anytime external projects wanted to do cool stuff on Bitcoin, the default stance was to say, no, that's not what Bitcoin was designed for, and possibly, okay, but do it like this, which is the least harmful to nodes. Under that paradigm, the onus was on external developers to build their apps differently and play by the rules. Now we're in the opposite end of the spectrum, and it's important for people to realize this, that this is really the first time that Bitcoin Core has become this pro-spam as a whole. Now we're in the opposite end of the spectrum. We have core devs arguing that we need to lift the cap of op return, where arbitrary data is stored, because it's annoying to external projects. The burden shifts to node runners so devs could do cool stuff on Bitcoin. This is, I think, a good summary. Ghost of Unhosted Marcellus writes here, throwback to when Bitcoin developers still called bad actors like Mar, the mining pool, still called them adversarial miners, and were worried about witness space being abused to store arbitrary data. This is back from the days of SegWit, January 2017. Why a discount factor of 4? Why not 2 or 8? Talking about the SegWit discount, where you get a fee discount for doing transactions for part of the input. And this is back from 2017, as I said, and they wrote back then, this was really the consensus about how it should work with Bitcoin Core software. Making the discount too large, this witness get discount too large, would lead people to use the witness space to store general purpose data on the blockchain, or adversarial miners, this is back when they still use this word, or adversarial miners may fill excess space with random junk to defeat fast relay schemes that rely on similar mempools. And this is exactly where we are today, where we do have adversarial miners filling block space with junk. But the difference is now, today, Bitcoin Core doesn't seem to have a problem with this, whereas they did in the past. We can also see evidence of this back from BIP 132 about compact blocks. This was a warning from Bitcoin Core to miners, and in this is a great demonstration of how Bitcoin Core was really siding with the nodes and telling miners, you better conform. They wrote here back in BIP 152, the overall effect of such relay differences on the network may result in blocks which include widely discouraged transactions losing a stale block race. So if a mining pool stuffs a block full of spam, this would be widely discouraged transactions, and the reason they would lose a stale block race would be miners may wish to configure their node, or this is how they would avoid it. Miners may wish to configure their node to take common relay policies into consideration. In other words, the miners should bend to the nodes, not the other way around. Otherwise, they're just going to end up with orphan blocks, and they will have spent all that electricity mining a block for nothing. Bitcoin Mechanic points out here from this Bitcoin Core blog post that we've been talking about today, Bitcoin blog development, there's this phrase, knowingly refusing to relay transactions that miners would include in blocks anyway forces users into alternate communication channels, undermining the above goals. And as Bitcoin Mechanic points out, zero mention here that refusal to relay transactions decreases the chance of those transactions existing in the first place. And I would agree with Mechanic, that's a huge omission and shows they're not really thinking through these things as clearly as they should. And then Bitcoin Core, according to Mechanic, saying big spammers are a force of nature that cannot be negotiated with, not human beings who can use other networks or methods Bitcoin nodes are okay with. So again, the whole perspective here has been flipped, and the emphasis is on what's good for the miners and what the miners are already going to choose to mine. And of course, they're going to choose to mine expensive junk, but the emphasis is not on what does this do to the Bitcoin nodes. And that's always where the historical emphasis has been. And Core and other software implementations like Knots have sought to protect Bitcoin node runners from having to store excessive spam. Then we have Gloria Zhao here, who is one of the lead maintainers over at Bitcoin Core, putting out this post on Twitter, sort of to accompany that blog post we've been talking about. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but this is sort of a companion piece. She writes, there have been a number of demands that Bitcoin Core use transaction relay policy to prevent certain kinds of transactions from being mined based on use case. This idea has been controversial for various reasons, including number one, Bitcoin Core is a completely voluntary piece of software that may or may not be run by miners. It cannot force anybody to do anything at all. Of course, as we were talking about earlier in this video, Bitcoin Core is the default implementation. So what's in it does matter. And saying it's voluntary is fine, but when you still control 88% of the network, the defaults do matter. So I wanted to respond to her opening statement here. There have been a number of demands that Bitcoin Core use transaction relay policy to prevent certain kinds of transactions from being mined based on use case. This idea has been controversial for various reasons. So I wanted to tease that apart. Number one, dating from the era of Satoshi himself, continuing over time, including the efforts we've spoken about on this channel before, the efforts to stop Satoshi dies from spamming the chain, through the Opportune Wars of 2014, all the way up until the inscriptions hack in 2023, the idea of filtering out or otherwise seeking to discourage non-monetary uses of Bitcoin, in other words, spam, has always been the norm. This has always been the norm and not at all controversial, as Gloria seems to say here. Bitcoin culture has always been anti-spam, and Gloria is attempting to rewrite history here. Number two response would be Bitcoin Core software already seeks to prevent many different kinds of transactions from making it to miners, including filters that prevent dust transactions from being relayed by nodes. In other words, Bitcoin nodes and Bitcoin Core nodes are already doing filtering, and they don't just let the miners have whatever they want, as this opening statement would seem to say. Number three, a number of demands. Gloria is saying there have been a number of demands that Bitcoin Core do this or that. A number of demands, actually most of the demands, have been from Bitcoiners telling Core not to change a filter, not to blow open the Opportune filter, not to change a filter that's been working really well. And then Gloria goes on to write later in that post, quote, this isn't an official top-down post from a corporation's marketing department, but a rare case of public alignment amongst a group of people who staunchly avoid centralized direction. When she writes a rare case of public alignment, sure, you can call a bunch of core devs closing ranks and doubling down on spam. You can call that public alignment. But I think it's pretty ironic to be calling it public alignment when the actual public, actual Bitcoiners who use node software, and it's unclear whether any of these Bitcoin Core devs actually even use this software very much, as we talked about in a previous video. But it's pretty ironic to be calling it public alignment when the actual public is fleeing from Bitcoin Core software in record numbers and moving to Bitcoin Knots. This is what is in fact happening, and Gloria, for some reason, chooses to ignore it. And I know the reason, of course, because it's incredibly embarrassing, because Bitcoin Core has just lost 8% of market share to Bitcoin Knots in just the past few weeks. And Bitcoin Core is just going to ignore this inconvenient fact in its public announcement and talk about how everyone is closing ranks. Hodling Like I Mean It writes, this is exactly this post. This is exactly the kind of shenanigans that centralized political organizations put out preemptively to manage public relations just before doing something controversial that the majority clearly doesn't want. And it's very clear to me as well that Bitcoin Core is about to merge this new change to Opportune, and then they're going to eventually take away the ability to configure it as well. And then Hodling Like I Mean It goes on to write, the irony completely eludes them apparently. We, a group of 24 people, are making decisions about a decentralized protocol. It's all but official now. The next Bitcoin civil war is about to start. And I think I would agree with that, unfortunately. Here's some predictions. Bitcoin Core will continue to double down, as we saw in Gloria's post and as we saw in that blog post. This is how institutions unfortunately always behave, because it's quite difficult for institutions to pivot or to admit that they've been wrong about something. So Bitcoin Core will continue to double down. They will continue to lose market share. In a few years from now, I imagine Bitcoin Core will only have 20 to 30% of market share. But if the current trend of Bitcoiners dumping Bitcoin Core for Bitcoin Knots continues at the current rate, this could happen much, much sooner. We're still seeing Bitcoin Knots nodes skyrocketing, just the chart going completely vertical. If we take a look now, Bitcoin Knots are now 11.2% of the network. So people are moving over, people are dumping core in record numbers. If you'd like to run a Bitcoin Knots node, you can run one on your existing desktop or laptop, or you can run one on a personal server like a Start9 server or Umbrel server. I'll put links to all the resources in the description notes below, including this blog post, as well as this video about how to configure Bitcoin Knots when you're running it to stop relaying spam, as well as Satoshi 21's 2 videos about running Bitcoin Knots, and then a new video that I found very helpful from Paul Lamb about switching to Bitcoin from Bitcoin Core to Knots on Windows, Mac, Linux, Start9, Umbrel, MyNode, and Raspi Blitz. So be sure to check that out. Give it a like, and also subscribe to Paul's channel if you find it helpful. Subscribe to Satoshi 21's channel as well if you find it helpful. It's very important for us plebs to support each other, because we're up against malicious miners, we're up against Bitcoin Core here, and this really is time for this grassroots movement against Bitcoin Core and against the spammers to materialize and take power. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.